Ladies and gentlemen, I am here tonight to tell you a very strange story. A story so strange that no one will believe it. But ladies and gentlemen, seeing is believing. And we, my partners and I, have brought back the living proof of our adventure. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before I tell you any more, I am going to show you the greatest thing your eyes have ever beheld. He was a king and a god in the world he knew. And now he comes to civilization, merely a captive, a show to gratify your curiosity. Ladies and gentlemen, look at Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. These lines come from RKO's 1933 classic horror film, King Kong. They're spoken by the character Carl Denham, who is introducing King Kong to a live New York audience. In the scene, Denham has just returned from Skull Island, where he has discovered the anomaly Kong, and now he's going to bring him back to the United States to make a buck, to make himself famous. Carl Denham is also a thinly veiled representation of the film's creator and director, Marion C. Cooper, also using King Kong to make a name for himself. Marion C. Cooper was an adventurous showman with a flair for drama and a passion for exploration, aviation, and cinema. In 1932, he combined those passions and teamed up with old pal and newsreel photographer Ernest B. Schoedsack and the original creator of stop-motion animation, Willis O'Brien, to create the classic film King Kong. Little did those three men know that 80 years later, their 18-inch primate, made of bendable wire, foam rubber, and rabbit fur, would become one of the most cherished and enduring cinematic icons of all time. Today, their misunderstood monster, well, he stands for much more than the terrifying gorilla Marion C. Cooper imagined all those years ago. Today, he has inspired 7 films, several spoofs and ripoffs, and countless movies that play with the original premise of King Kong. In addition, Kong ignites the public imagination, because he or images and ideas linked to him can be found in advertisements, toys, songs, television shows, collectibles, greeting cards, and the list goes on. He is much more. He has evolved to stand for much more than that terrifying gorilla that Marion C. Cooper imagined. So what I want to do with you tonight is explore the iconic potential of King Kong and talk about him as an icon. He stands for so much more than he did when he first emerged. He is one icon in a culture that thrives on creating icons, in a culture that would rather send a message through an icon than to communicate that message directly. I tell my students as communication studies majors, it's probably a good idea if you could identify and read an icon. It's probably a useful skill. And King Kong is certainly an icon worthy of our consideration. So first, I want to tell you what I mean when I use the word icon. Justin Timberlake is not an icon. Neither is Beyonce. We often use the word icon to describe a celebrity or a star. But for me, it's always more than that. An icon does cultural work. An icon is an image that represents much more than itself. An icon performs. When I look at Justin Timberlake, I see Justin Timberlake. But when I look at Madonna, for example, I see the 80s. I see the story of a middle-class girl from Detroit. I see fashion. I see the controversial third wave of feminism. I see an advocate for gay rights. I see dance. I see pastiche or stylistic impersonation. Now, to give you an idea of the power of Kong as an icon, let's just say that Madonna is Naomi Watts in this image. Madonna as an icon, as an image that has come to represent much more than herself, is nothing compared to King Kong. As an icon, King Kong is a beast. Now, in 2007, right here on LSU's campus, I created a performance, a live performance entitled The Life and Times of King Kong in the Hopkins Black Box Theater in the Department of Communication Studies. On the anniversary of the 75th anniversary of the original film, the ensemble group paid homage to the films, the story, and the icon of King Kong through multiple live and mediatized scenes. As a part of the rehearsal process, I asked them to watch all 7 King Kong films, and then we talked about what makes a King Kong film other than the title and a giant gorilla. And then we created our own version of the tale to share with a live audience. Simply put, we used the process of performance as a method for coming to understand how the cinematic icon came to be, how he changed over the course of popular and film history, and what was this big deal about a big monkey. We learned that King Kong wasn't just a big monkey, and that the tale wasn't just a tale about the clash of the mysterious primordial world and modern civilization. Although that is a significant theme if you've listened to our speakers today. But we learned that as an icon, Kong and his tale, always a journey to an unknown place, always involving a human being as the primate's impossible love interest, always ending in chaos, death, or disaster. As an icon, Kong can represent different societal concerns at different times in history, and he has the potential to communicate those concerns in accessible and entertaining ways. So, to quote 38 Special, hold on loosely, because I'm going to share, in honor of the 7 films, 7 of the ways that Kong has evolved as an icon throughout history. He's a monster. He's cinema itself. He's a victim of colonization and capitalism and a symbol of slavery. He is nature versus culture. He is a gender critique. He is a Christ figure and an advocate for difference, and he's a postmodern mascot. So, number 1, he's a monster. The first film premiered in 1933 during the studio era. It was a classic black and white film that also emerged during the golden age of horror. So lots of scholars and fans see Kong as first and foremost a terrifying creature, RKO's perfect answer to Universal's bankable monsters of the day, like Dracula and Frankenstein. And in the first film, as a stop-motion puppet, he was primarily monster. Sure, he took a shine to Fay Wray, the original Scream Queen, but she was called a Scream Queen for a reason. She screamed the entire film. She was terrified of him. He was a monster. Now, to bring a giant monster alive on the screen, we need special effects. So 2, he's cinema itself. He is a special effect extraordinaire. In fact, for every Kong film, a new special effect was developed or refined to bring the story to life on the screen. Stop-motion animation, rear and miniature projection, prosthetic makeup effects, models, green screen, CGI, you name it. And since cinema is built on and obsessed with fantastical effects, and he is the most fantastic effect, he is cinema itself. Now, as a monster and as a special effect, we are relying on Kong's form as a marker of his iconicity. But we can also look to the content of his story, to shape him as an icon. One of the primary messages in the films is the way that Kong gets colonized. King Kong is all about the savage ideology of colonization. And I use that word savage specifically. The films ask us to consider what is savage. In every film, he is abused by Westerners or those with a Western perspective. He is taken from his home, exploited for economic gain, and capitalism sees to his doom. And there is a message of race that weaves uncomfortably throughout the narrative, always associated with the uncivilized natives of the island, taken from his homeland against his will in the belly of a ship and sold for profit. Like I said, it's an uncomfortable message, but it's there in every film if we look for it. Kong is also culture versus nature. He is a conservationist dream warning narrative. Here we have what is clearly the last remaining species of its kind, worshipped in its natural habitat, taken out of that habitat by the hapless and greedy, and then it dies. Nature fights a valiant fight, but it loses. King Kong is an inconvenient truth. And that theme increases over time. John Guillermin's 1976 King Kong is set in the midst of the first U.S. oil crisis. Kong is discovered during an oil expedition by an oil executive who captures him and wants to use him as a symbol, as an icon of big oil. Now, of course, we know the story. We know how he dies, except for instead of falling to his death from the Empire State Building, that symbol of modern civilization built in 1929, he plunges to his death from the top of the Twin Towers, icons themselves, built in 1973 as the heart of the World Trade Center complex, and now symbolizing much more than we could ever address in a talk like this. By now, you should be warming up to Kong's iconic potential. My favorite reading of Kong is as a gender critique, in that he frames the girl, who is established as an object in film after film for the first half of the narrative. In a world that makes nature and objects things to be consumed, enjoyed, owned, and manipulated by subjects made in culture, Kong allows the girl to be both subject and object by his simultaneous difference from and sameness to her. Yes, we could read him as hyper-masculine, wanting to own and control her, but he protects her at every turn. They are linked. They're both orphans. They're both other. We come to know him through her eyes because she spends all of the time with him. We come to sympathize with him through his treatment of her. Through their mutual experience, we come to see the others, or the subjects, as oppressors, bent on violence and destruction. Now, once we see Kong as the opposite of violence, as a protector, then it's not much of a stretch to see him as a Christ figure. Now, sure, he is a god to the natives, but as a misunderstood God, he's eventually crucified by those who are afraid of the mystery he represents. And eventually, he even sacrifices himself for the love of another. This is the biggest shift in the history of Kong. He goes from being a terrifying, monstrous gorilla to an ultimate hero and even an advocate for difference. To love Kong, to want to save Kong, to want to rewrite the story so that Kong doesn't have to die, we have to proceed differently. We have to reconsider what we think of as a monster. We have to embrace art as a form that can communicate important messages. We have to conserve nature. We have to ask questions of institutions that would harm human and non-human others. We have to rewrite tired gender scripts and love in new ways. This is my catch-all category. It's the final one. Kong is a postmodern mascot. Since he's taken the journey from monster to Christ figure, it seems that his meaning is perpetually shifting, perpetually up for grabs. He's a go-to icon for anyone, advertisers, cartoonists, graphic designers, songwriters. They want to make him whatever they want to make him. His potential, I say, has exploded. And I wonder if, since that explosion, that concentrated critical work that I've been outlining here wanes as popular commercial culture embraces him more and more. Now, a performance with other people, an ensemble, students here at LSU led us to these kinds of readings. I wonder what kinds of other meanings you would come up with if you watched Kong or any of the Kong films yourselves. But even more importantly, I'd like you to ask yourself the next time somebody uses the word icon, what does the icon mean? What does it symbolize? What does it represent? What kind of cultural work does it do? And now, ladies and gentlemen, before I tell you any more, I want to show you the greatest thing your eyes have ever beheld. He was a king and a god in the world he knew. But now he comes to civilization, merely a captive, a show to gratify your curiosity. Ladies and gentlemen, look at Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. Thank you.